The final jolt of electricity surged through his body, wrenching him against the electric chair as the room fell eerily silent. His last breath was a long, drawn-out gasp, the kind that leaves a mark on those who witness it. The execution was swift, yet something about it lingered in the air. Imagine being there, the moment of truth, a life hanging by a thread, the eyes of the condemned, the families in the front row, and the hum of the state's machinery grinding through the motions. Yet in the silence that follows, the true weight of the crime is felt. The air thick with finality, no second chances, no redemption. But this wasn't just any case. What led up to this moment wasn't as simple as guilt or innocence, nor was it the standard tale of justice served. This is a story soaked in rage, in desperation, and in violence. Each moment more horrific than the last. Each second a countdown to the end. And when the story of this man was finally told, it wasn't just the crime that haunted people. It was the choices that led to it, the choices that shaped his fate, and in turn shaped the lives of those around him. If you think you know this story, think again. The details of his crime, his final moments, the truths we hide, will twist your perception of justice, right and wrong, and the true cost of violence. But beware, the path we are about to walk is not for the faint of heart. This case is unsettling. It challenges every belief you have about right, wrong, and everything in between. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to all of you who have helped our channel grow. Every like, comment, and share not only fuels our journey, but spreads awareness of these chilling stories. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. We'd love to hear where you're watching from, and we welcome you to join our community of truth seekers. In 1986, justice was served in 18 executions across the United States. But these aren't just the statistics. They each represent a life marked by crime, trial, and the ultimate conclusion, execution. Each case tells a story of its own, a story shaped by choices, consequences, and finality. In this true crime investigation, we uncover the chilling details of the crimes, the legal battles, the final meals, and the last words before the end. Welcome to Mindframe True Crimes. One of the most notorious cases began on October 29, 1977 in South Carolina, where 17-year-old James Terry Roach became involved in a horrifying crime that would shape his fate forever. Along with 22-year-old Joseph Carl Shaw and 16-year-old Ronald Maffei, Roach participated in the brutal murder of 14-year-old Carlotta Hartness and the killing of her 17-year-old boyfriend, Thomas Taylor. The three young men, under the influence of drugs and alcohol, set out to find a victim. Shaw's suggestion led them to a baseball park, where the unsuspecting couple sat. Roach, holding a rifle, confronted Taylor, demanding money. Shaw then shot Taylor, and Hartness was abducted, violently assaulted, and killed. The crime was both senseless and cruel, leaving a community in shock. In December 1977, Roach pled guilty to 2 counts of murder, criminal sexual conduct, kidnapping, and robbery. Despite evidence of mental impairments, his IQ ranged from 75 to 80, and there were concerns about the possibility of Huntington's disease. The judge found the aggravating factors of the crime too severe to ignore. The decision was clear. Death penalty. Roach's co-defendant, Shaw, met his own end in 1985, while Maffei received a sentence of life imprisonment. But Roach, facing his last days, requested a final meal, fried shrimp and hush puppies, shared with a friend. On January 10, 1986, at 5 a.m., Roach was escorted to the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. He was strapped into the infamous electric chair, a grim tool of execution, ready to face the consequence of his actions. Before his death, Roach was given the opportunity to make a final statement. Holding a prepared statement in his hands, he spoke directly to the victims' families. "To the family of the victims, my heart is still with you in your sorrow. May you forgive me just as I know my Lord has done." Turning to his own family, Roach expressed his final sentiment: "I love you." His words conveyed a sense of resignation, of peace, despite the brutal nature of his crimes. The execution was carried out using South Carolina's electric chair with 2 jolts of electricity. Each burst ranged from 1,500 to 2,300 volts, lasting around 1 minute. Witnesses observed the violent reactions of Roach's body as the electricity coursed through him, forcing his body against the back of the chair before it slumped forward. At 5:16 a.m., James Terry Roach was pronounced dead. His story, marked by tragic choices and a final moment of reckoning, came to an end. His execution was the closing chapter in a narrative that had begun with a brutal crime, one that forever impacted the families, the community, and the justice system. Charles William Bass, Texas. On August 16, 1979, 23-year-old Charles William Bass made a choice that would forever alter the course of his life. What began as a routine robbery quickly spiraled into a fatal confrontation. Armed with a handgun, Bass entered Shirley's Lounge in Houston, demanding money from the cashier. In a chilling turn, he made off with approximately $300 in cash and rolled coins. But the consequences of his crime were only beginning. Shortly after the robbery, Houston City Marshals Charles Henry Baker and R.A. McCammon, unaware of the robbery at the time, stopped Bass in a residential area. They recognized him from an unrelated traffic warrant. What followed was a deadly exchange. As the officers attempted to subdue him, Bass drew a .380 caliber pistol and shot Officer Baker in the stomach. Despite his injury, Baker managed to return fire, striking Bass in the leg. But the confrontation didn't end there. In a final brutal act, Bass shot Baker again, this time fatally, before fleeing the scene. The manhunt for Bass stretched over the course of several days. 4 days later, he was arrested in Covington, Kentucky, after family members alerted authorities to his location. The crime was horrific, the execution of the officer cold and deliberate. In 1980, Bass was convicted of capital murder under Texas's newly revised death penalty laws, which required juries to consider both the circumstances of the crime and whether the defendant posed a future danger to society. The evidence against him was undeniable, and his fate seemed sealed. As the day of his execution drew near, Bass made an unusual choice. He declined a formal last meal, requesting only a cheese sandwich and coffee 4 hours before his execution. On the morning of his execution, as the clock ticked closer to his final moments, Bass offered a last statement to his family, addressing his mother, Rose England. "Don't feel bad, Mama, I deserve this," he said, urging her to tell everyone he said goodbye. His demeanor was somber and resigned, a stark contrast to earlier reports of nervous laughter during his pre-execution preparations. Bass's execution took place in Texas, where the justice system would ensure that the punishment meted out would be as final as his crime. His story is one of violence, decision, and a life irreversibly altered by a single act. At 1:21 a.m. on March 12, 1986, Arthur Lee Jones's fate was sealed. The 47-year-old's violent spree in Mobile, Alabama, began on August 17, 1981. That day, he shot and killed Vaughn Thompson, a young storekeeper, during a robbery. Later, he targeted William Josiah Weeman, a 71-year-old cab driver, murdering him with 4 gunshots to the head and neck. Convicted of capital murder, Jones's appeals, which claimed racial bias and juror misconduct, were swiftly denied. His final meal was a simple one: salmon, panadas, candied yams, coleslaw, cold peaches, and grape drink. At 12:14 a.m. on March 21, 1986, in Alabama's electric chair, Jones met his end. His last words, though not officially recorded, reflected his resignation. "Don't feel bad, Mom. I deserve it." Daniel Morris Thomas, Florida, April 15, 1986. At 12:07 p.m., Thomas's execution was swift. The electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, delivered 2 jolts of electricity between 1,500 to 2,300 volts, and at 12:19 p.m., he was declared dead, leaving behind a life marked by unspeakable violence. On January 1, 1976, the 29-year-old Thomas broke into the Anderson family home in Polk County, Florida, wearing a ski mask and armed with a .22 caliber rifle. He shot Charles Anderson 5 times, killing him, while Shirley Anderson, his wife, was assaulted at gunpoint with a stolen .38 revolver. After looting the home, Thomas fled the scene with guns, a wristwatch, and a calculator. Indicted for first-degree murder, sexual battery, robbery, and burglary, Thomas was convicted in 1977 based on ballistic evidence and eyewitness testimony. During sentencing, the judge cited aggravating factors, including the brutality of the crime and previous offenses, leading to a death penalty verdict. Before his execution, Thomas refused the elaborate last meal offered. Instead, he chose to forgo the lobster, steak, and pie, opting for nothing more than his final moments. His last words condemned the political use of the death penalty, but he showed no signs of distress as his life ended with the execution. Jeffrey Alan Barney, Texas, April 16, 1986. At 12:22 a.m., Jeffrey Alan Barney became the 12th person executed in Texas since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1976. His final words, "I'm sorry for what I'd done and I deserve it. I hope Jesus forgives me," marked the end of a chilling chapter. In November 1981, 28-year-old Barney visited the home of John Longsworth, a minister who had once helped him with parole and employment. A heated argument with Ruby Mae Longsworth, John's 54-year-old wife, escalated quickly when she allegedly called him a bum. In a violent outburst, Barney raped and strangled Ruby with a microphone cord, leaving the community in shock. The crime was made all the more disturbing because Barney had once been supported by the very family he murdered. A murder investigation led to damning physical evidence, including the murder weapon in Barney's own confession, his violent past including juvenile offenses and a recent prison release, only added to the horrific nature of the crime. Despite his defense citing his troubled upbringing and mental instability, Barney's capital murder conviction stood firm. Barney chose not to challenge his death sentence, a rare move that marked his resignation to his fate. Prosecutors emphasized the premeditation and brutality of the attack. As the execution details unfolded, Barney requested a simple last meal, Frosted Flakes cereal with milk. In his final moments, Barney expressed regret and love for his family, telling them, "I love you," before being executed by lethal injection. His tragic tale highlights the disturbing choices that ultimately sealed his fate. Do you believe these executions were truly necessary, and should they be carried out in this way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping true crime stories and execution details from real cases that left lasting impacts. David Livingston Funes, Florida. On December 16, 1974, 27-year-old David Livingston Funes entered Endell Liquors in Jacksonville, armed with a knife, to carry out a robbery that would forever alter the lives of his victims. In the chaos that ensued, Funes brutally murdered 52-year-old Anna Waldrop and 56-year-old Clayton Caton Reagan, slashing their throats. A third victim, 62-year-old Bertha Malode, survived the attack but succumbed to her injuries in 1977. Funes fled the scene with only $365, but witnesses quickly identified him. He had a history of psychological instability, worsened by severe PTSD from his service in Vietnam, where he sustained life-changing injuries. Despite his troubled past, Funes was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder in 1975, with prosecutors highlighting the calculated nature of the crime. His defense argued that PTSD had impaired his mental state at the time, but both state and federal courts rejected these claims. The death penalty was imposed. In his final moments, Funes declined a formal last meal, choosing instead to eat vanilla ice cream hours before his execution. On April 22, 1986, Funes was executed in Florida's infamous electric chair, Old Sparky. A 20,000-volt jolt caused visible smoke from his leg electrode, and within minutes he was declared dead at 39 years old. His last words were unspoken. Instead, he mouthed, "I love you," to his attorney, J. Kelly Pinkerton, Texas. At just 17 years old, J. Kelly Pinkerton broke into the home of Sarah Dawn Lawrence in Amarillo, Texas, with the intent to rob her. What followed was a brutal attack, leaving Sarah with multiple stab wounds. Just a year later, in 1980, Pinkerton murdered 25-year-old Sher Welch, a furniture store employee. In 1981, Pinkerton was arrested after a murder investigation linked him to both crimes. He was found guilty and sentenced to death in separate trials. Despite filing multiple appeals over the next 7 years, all were denied, and the execution details were set for 1986. The day before his execution, Pinkerton was offered a last meal: 2 cheeseburgers with fries, onions, lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, ketchup, mustard, and a cola drink. On May 15, 1986, he was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville's Walls Unit. He became the 16th person executed in Texas since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. His father, Gene Pinkerton, was the only family member present at the execution. As the true crime case closed, Pinkerton's final words were poignant: "Be strong for me. I'm at peace with myself and with my God." Before succumbing to the lethal injection, he uttered, "I feel dizzy. I feel dizzy." Ronald J. Straight, Florida. On October 3, 1976, 30-year-old Ronald J. Straight, alongside accomplices Timothy Palms and Jane Albert, lured James Stone, a 41-year-old furniture store owner, to his death in a cold, premeditated robbery. The trio tricked Stone into Albert's apartment, where they ambushed him, tied him up, and tortured him for 30 minutes. They cut off his fingers, stabbed him 18 times, and then placed his body in a coffin-like box before dumping it in the St. Johns River. Straight fled to California using Stone's car and credit cards. After being arrested during a violent confrontation with police, Straight was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery in 1970. Despite claiming ineffective legal representation and bias in his trial, his death sentence was upheld. His final meal was declined, and he offered no last words before being executed by electric chair on May 20, 1986, at 5:12 p.m. in Florida's Old Sparky. He was pronounced dead within minutes. Rudy Ramos Essate, Texas, and June 8, 1978, 28-year-old Rudy Ramos Essate shot and killed Houston police officer Timothy Hearn during an undercover operation. Essate, armed with a .380 caliber pistol, first shot Officer Murray Jordan before fatally wounding Hearn, who was already clearly identified as law enforcement. Essate fled the scene, only to be captured days later. Eslate's trial began in August 1978, where his defense claimed self-defense, but eyewitness testimony and ballistic evidence proved otherwise. He was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in October 1978 for killing a peace officer. His final meal consisted of fried chicken, corn on the cob, and pecan pie. In his final moments, he told his witnesses, "Be cool. Thank you for being my friends. Give my love to everybody." At 12:21 a.m. on June 9, 1986, he was executed by lethal injection in Texas. Kenneth Albert Brock, Texas. On May 21, 1974, 26-year-old Kenneth Brock entered a 7-Eleven in Houston, Texas, armed with a .380 caliber pistol. During the robbery, he held 31-year-old store manager Michael Sedita hostage. As Brock fled into an alley, he exchanged gunfire with Houston Police Sergeant P.M. Hogg. Using Sedita as a human shield, Brock fatally shot Sedita in the chest, killing him instantly. Brock, a Marine deserter with a violent history, was captured after a brief manhunt. Ballistics and eyewitness testimony tied him to the crime. In 1970, he was convicted of capital murder. Despite his defense arguing that the killing was accidental, forensic evidence showed Sedita was shot at close range, disproving the claim. Brock's conviction was upheld after several appeals were denied. Governor Mark White refused clemency, and on June 19, 1986, at 12:18 a.m., Brock was executed by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. His final meal was a double-meat cheeseburger with mustard, fries, and Dr. Pepper. When asked for a final statement, he simply replied, "Nah, I'm ready." Jerome Bowden of Georgia. On October 11, 1976, 34-year-old Jerome Bowden broke into 55-year-old Catherine Stryker's home in Columbus, Georgia, during a robbery. He beat her with a pellet gun barrel and stabbed her post-mortem with a butcher knife. Her mother, Wheezy Jenkins, survived the attack. Bowden was arrested shortly after, his confession and physical evidence linking him to the crime. Despite a documented intellectual disability, IQ 65, his defense team argued that he could not comprehend the severity of his actions. In 1986, a final IQ test confirmed his condition, but clemency was denied. On June 24, 1986, at 10:13 a.m., Bowden was executed via electrocution at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Center. In his final statement, he thanked the institution for their care, but acknowledged his fate, saying, I hope that by my execution being carried out, it will bring some light to this thing that is wrong. The 2,000-volt jolt ended his life swiftly. Michael Marnell Smith, Virginia. On May 23, 1977, 30-year-old Michael Marnell Smith ambushed 29-year-old Audrey Jean Weiler while she sunbathed near the James River in Virginia. Smith, a man with a violent past, held Weiler at knife point, raped her, and then strangled and drowned her to prevent her from reporting the crime. He also stabbed her post-mortem to ensure her silence. Weiler's body was discovered 2 days later, floating in the river. Witnesses helped lead authorities to Smith, who was arrested after a detailed confession during police interrogation. He admitted to the murder, claiming he feared Weiler would send him back to prison for his past crimes. In November 1977, Smith was put on trial for capital murder in James City County. Prosecutors highlighted the brutality of the crime and Smith's prior rape conviction. Dr. Arthur Centaur, a court-appointed psychiatrist, testified about Smith's history of sexual misconduct and deviant behavior, bolstering the case for the death penalty. Despite objections from the defense, the jury found Smith guilty. He was sentenced to death, with the jury citing his violent past and the extreme nature of the crime. On July 31, 1986, at 11 p.m., Smith was executed by electric chair at the Virginia State Penitentiary in Richmond. At 39 years old, he was pronounced dead within minutes. Smith offered no final statement. His demeanor resigned as he entered the execution chamber. Randy Lynn Wolves, Texas. On June 16, 1979, 30-year-old Randy Lynn Wolves entered the Bolero Drive-In Theater in Kerrville, Texas, where 43-year-old Betty Stoss was working as a ticket seller. Without warning, Wolves attacked her with a tire tool, stabbing her repeatedly before stealing around $600 from the cash register. In a final cruel act, Wolves set the ticket booth on fire while Stoss was still alive. She died from head trauma, stab wounds, and smoke inhalation. Wolves was arrested just hours later, still at the drive-in, watching a movie in Stoss's stolen car with the stolen money in his pocket. A ninth-grade dropout, he had a long history of substance abuse and had been addicted to liquid Valium, which he injected intravenously. On the day of the murder, he claimed to have taken 40 doses, leaving him with no memory of the crime. In 1980, Wolves was convicted of capital murder for killing Stoss during a robbery. Prosecutors presented evidence of his violent past, including childhood incidents of animal cruelty, arguing that his actions were deliberate and that he posed an ongoing danger. The jury sentenced him to death, citing both the brutality of the murder and the risk of future violence. Before his execution, Wolves requested a simple last meal: 2 cheeseburgers, French fries, iced tea, and a Tootsie Roll Pop. On August 20th, 1986, at 12:23 a.m., Wolves was executed by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. Due to damaged veins from years of drug abuse, Wolves assisted the officials in locating a usable injection site on his tattooed arm. He was pronounced dead shortly after. His final words were brief: "I want to say I am sorry to the victim and her family. I wish there was some way I could make it all right. I love all." Larry Smith, Texas. On February 3, 1978, 30-year-old Larry Smith walked into a 7-Eleven in Dallas, Texas, accompanied by an unnamed accomplice. Inside, 26-year-old night manager Michael Dean Mason was working alone. Smith pulled out a pistol, demanding access to the store's safe. When Mason said he didn't have the keys, Smith's accomplice threw him to the floor and grabbed the cash drawer. As they fled, Smith leaned over the counter and shot Mason in the back of the head, killing him instantly. A 16-year-old employee, Fred Norris, witnessed the crime from outside. He later identified Smith after seeing him pull a cap over his face, resembling a ski mask. Smith was arrested shortly after and charged with capital murder. During his 1978 trial, the prosecution presented ballistic evidence linking Smith's gun to the crime, along with Norris's eyewitness testimony. The jury found Smith guilty, emphasizing his cold, calculated nature and future dangerousness, leading to a death sentence. Despite appeals, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, and Governor Mark White denied clemency. On August 22, 1986, at 12:24 a.m., Smith was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville's Walls Unit. His final words were brief: "Tell my mother I love her and continue on without me." Chester Lee Wicker, Texas. On April 4, 1980, 30-year-old Chester Lee Wicker abducted 22-year-old Suzanne New after her car broke down in Beaumont, Texas. A university student and part-time librarian, New was forced into Wicker's car at gunpoint, with witnesses seeing the struggle. Left behind were her purse and necklace. Wicker drove New to Crystal Beach, where he attempted to rape and strangle her, then buried her alive in a shallow grave. Forensic analysis later revealed sand in her lungs, proving she was still alive when she was buried. 18 days after the crime, Wicker led police to her body during an interrogation. A murder investigation revealed Wicker's violent past, with prior convictions for rape and assault. In 1981, he was convicted of capital murder. Despite his defense claiming his confession was coerced, the jury cited both the murder during a felony and his violent criminal record as aggravating factors, sentencing him to death. On August 26, 1986, at 12:10 a.m., Wicker was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville's Walls Unit. His last meal was lettuce, tomatoes, and 2 cartons of milk. He was pronounced dead shortly after. John William Rook, North Carolina. On May 12, 1980, 23-year-old John William Rook abducted 25-year-old Anne Marie Rowe as she walked home in Raleigh, North Carolina. Driving a borrowed car, Rook blocked her path, assaulted her with a tire iron, and forced her into the vehicle. He drove her to a secluded area where he raped, beat, and slashed her before running her over with the car. Forensic evidence, including sand in her lungs, confirmed that she had been buried alive. Witnesses identified the car and Rook, whose waist-length blonde ponytail stood out. Arrested shortly afterward, Rook confessed to the crime, although his defense later claimed the confession was coerced. Blood evidence and tire tracks linked him directly to the murder investigation. In 1981, Rook was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping. The prosecution highlighted the brutality of the crime, while the defense pointed to Rook's abusive childhood and drug use. Despite the arguments, the jury found the crime aggravated by felony murder and cruelty, sentencing him to death. Rook's final meal request of 12 chili and cheese hot dogs was only partially eaten. He entered the death chamber at Central Prison, wearing a Harley-Davidson t-shirt, jeans, and dingo boots. At 2:11 a.m. on September 19, 1986, Rook was executed by lethal injection. His last words were simple: "I love you," directed to his spiritual advisor. Before dying, he added, "Tell the guys to continue their struggle to get off death row." Michael Wayne Evans, Texas. On June 26, 1977, 20-year-old Michael Wayne Evans and his accomplice, Stanley Earl Smith, targeted 36-year-old church pianist Alva Vera Guerrero and her fiancé, Mario Alvarado Garza, after an evening service at the Second Mexican Baptist Church in Dallas. The couple was forced at gunpoint to drive to a remote area, where Evans robbed them of $40 from church offerings and $12 from Garza's wallet. In a chilling act, Evans shot Garza 5 times and Guerrero twice in the head. Despite being critically wounded, Guerrero, still conscious, prayed aloud, "God forgive him." Evans responded by slashing her face from chin to forehead with a carpet knife. 4 days later, their bodies were discovered in a field. Evans was linked to the crime by a palm print on Guerrero's car and a distinctive .22 caliber pistol found near the bodies. Arrested on July 11, 1977, Evans confessed to the murders multiple times, implicating Smith. However, he later recanted, claiming his confessions were coerced. Witness testimony from his girlfriend, Belinda Key, placed him at the scene with bloodied clothes, where he admitted to jacking some people. In 1978, Evans was convicted, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the verdict due to improper jury exclusion. At a 1981 retrial, Evans was sentenced to death. In his final moments, Evans declined a last meal, making him the first Texas inmate to do so since the death penalty's reinstatement. As the execution details unfolded on December 4, 1986, at 12:21 a.m., Evans was executed by lethal injection. His final words were, "Freedom, freedom at last, man. It's been a good one." Richard Andrade, Texas, on March 20, 1984. 24-year-old Richard Andrade entered the Liquida Fagitita Lounge in Corpus Christi, Texas, where 28-year-old Cordelia Magavara was closing for the night. Andrade, the last patron, attacked Magavara during an attempted aggravated sexual assault, stabbing her 14 times in the heart, lungs, and extremities. Forensic evidence showed recent sexual activity. Magavara's body was discovered hours later, lying in a pool of blood, her clothing disheveled, and signs of a violent struggle evident. Andrade was linked to the crime through a palm print on a jukebox, fingerprints on a beer can, and a blood-stained shirt containing hair that matched Magavara's. While Andrade initially confessed during interrogation, he later claimed the confession was coerced. Despite challenges to the confession's reliability, ballistic and forensic evidence firmly supported the prosecution's case. In 1984, Andrade was convicted of capital murder. The jury affirmed both his future dangerousness and the heinous nature of the crime. The FBI analysis linking ink stains on Andrade's shirt to Magavara's broken pen played a key role in the conviction. Before his execution, Andrade requested a simple last meal: pizza, pinto beans, Spanish rice, and cake. As preparations for lethal injection began at Huntsville's Walls Unit, Andrade turned away from the witnesses. At 12:32 a.m. on December 18, 1986, Andrade was executed by lethal injection using sodium thiopental, pavulon, and potassium chloride. Do you believe justice was served in this case, or was something missed in the investigation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Mindframe True Crimes for more in-depth investigations into true crime cases and execution details that reveal the chilling truths behind these real-life stories.